You're listening to the Veterinary Innovation Podcast.
You're listening to the Veterinary Innovation Podcast. My name is not Shawn Wilkie. If it was, I'd be much more successful. Though along with his awesome co-host, he interviews the innovators in this space every week. Except this week. For the 100th episode of the Veterinary Innovation Podcast, we're doing something a little different. My name is Matthew Rawle. I'm the producer of the podcast, and this week I'll be your host for a conversation with the two men behind the show and how they and their businesses are innovating in the veterinary space. Whether you've been with us since the beginning or this is your first episode, thank you for your support. Introducing my guests at this time, Mr. Shawn Wilkie is the CEO of Talkatoo. He is also the co-host of the Veterinary Innovation Podcast. He is a serial entrepreneur, and a fun fact about Shawn that not a lot of people know is that he is a volunteer firefighter. My second guest, Dr. Ivan Zakharenkov, is the CEO of Veterinary Integration Solutions. He is the co-host of both the Veterinary Innovation Podcast and the Consolidate podcast. He has an MBA from the University of Cumbria, a DVM from Atlantic Veterinary College, and a fun fact about Ivan is that he recently took up photography as a hobby. Gentlemen, thank you both for joining me.
It's great to be here, Matt.
It's been so fascinating to see the development of both of your companies in conjunction with the podcast. The first episode was titled Retirement at the Age of 38. And at the time, close to 2 years ago now, you both were like, okay, what's next? I've started several companies. I've reached the highest highs. What else can I do? It's been very fascinating to see not only your business success, but also in conjunction, while it mostly has not been related, with the success of the podcast. I remember the first recording session we did, it was a lovely summer day, and we all collectively sat in a very small room for 7 hours with a laptop and a microphone, knocking out a bunch of episodes all at once. And the reason I remember that is because we all failed to notice that the microphone was not set to the right setting. So while Shawn was crystal clear, Ivan sounded like he might as well have been screaming from the other side of a glass window. So that also explains why the audio on some of the early episodes is very, very rough. They're all from that first record day. But we got better. The content of the podcast has been amazing. Over the last 100 episodes, we've had all manner of innovators and wonderful, lovely people. Everyone from, academics, marketers, consolidators, media personalities, C-suite executives, representatives from Mars and some of the other biggest companies in the veterinary space, all the way to, the other side of the spectrum, your bootstrap founders. And it's been a very lovely experience. I wouldn't trade it for the world. And thank you so much again, both of you, for joining me as we reflect and also talk a little bit more and dig a little bit more into the companies that you've built during this time.
It's weird to actually be able to talk to you and have you respond as opposed to just have it disappear.
Speaking of which, I want to focus in on an area that you both have experience with, but at the time, Shawn, Talkatoo, was involved with the Volta startup incubator in Halifax. What was the experience of working with them like? Usually when people start businesses, you have this idea of them, trying to bootstrap things in their garage. That's how a lot of famous businesses have started. That's how a lot of businesses continue to start. What's it been like working with Volta, the support you've gotten from them, and how it's been different from starting your previous companies?
Yeah, I think the idea of a startup ecosystem is really, really cool. It's all changed recently. So I think the support that we've got from Volta in the kind of tech ecosystem in Halifax, Nova Scotia, has been super helpful. Just being around other like-minded founders. There's a lot of great energy that exists and a lot of kind of sense of camaraderie and support.
If I may add to that, just Shawn, because some listeners might not know what it is. So you explained the emotion and what happens in it. I just want to throw a couple words to the innovators out there, what the incubator is and accelerators are. Basically, there's in almost every big city out there, there's a organization that you probably can find in a local incubation where there's capital meets innovation. That's really what it is. And usually it's somewhat government supported organization where there's a structure, there's training program, and there's help to learn how to do marketing, develop go-to-market strategy. There's certain lectures. These organizations bring in the speakers, previous innovators. They usually have the entrepreneur in residence. That's someone who is a serial entrepreneur that has done business in the past, that is on the admission committee. And then with your idea, you can come in any stage of development and propose your idea. And if they like that idea and it fits with the incubator direction or domain or whatever they're looking for, then they can accept you as a startup, and they'll provide you with all kinds of help. They'll connect you with the government programs, which is Shawn leveraged those really well in Canada. And my hats off to you, Shawn, for that. But if you're a startup, really look for the local incubator, because that's where A, they will give you the knowledge, B, they will potentially connect you with the government programs and grants, and C, there's usually a group of angel investors that sit around the incubator and support it financially and with advice, where you can pitch your ideas to certain angels that can invest money into it. So I highly, highly recommend to everybody who's trying to start something by yourself, find the local incubator. A lot of them are virtual right now, and that's what Volta is in Halifax.
Yeah, and I think just to build on that, it's also really interesting. One of the things that we've talked about a number of times in the show is kind of the way that you started SmartFlow and it being 100% remote. And, those conversations that we had early on when I was starting talking to you really kind of helped us cement and be ready for COVID, even though we weren't preparing for it. Our team is now widely geographically dispersed. Half of it's on the West Coast, half of it's on the East Coast. And, although I miss that experience of being in the tech incubator, I think it's also interesting to note that there's this world that exists to be able to access the best talent in the world now because we're all remote. And so there's highs and lows, and there's kind of pluses and minuses to both things. But it's just been interesting to kind of learn both of those things in the course of this company for me, Matt.
For sure. So, Ivan, you had a bit of a different experience when you started Veterinary Integration Solutions. You didn't take the startup incubator route. You kind of just bootstrapped it yourself. What has that been like, the experience of developing a new business and developing the veterinary consolidation model, which is quite unique in the industry?
Well, I can't say that I'm very proud of not participating in any incubator, but since I moved to New Brunswick, first of all, in St. John, there's no big incubator here, and I did try to join Shawn in Volta, but Volta is Nova Scotia, it's a different jurisdiction, different programs, and you're kind of not physically there. So I can't say that it's sort of strategically wise on my end. The other thing, and the reason I think for this, is that I'm missing my favorite part in a startup is being completely broke all the time. So, there's some proceeds that are left from SmartFlow that I was able to invest into veterinary integration solution and started. But that's what makes you lazy, because if you're lacking finances, every time in SmartFlow when we were running out of money, when Pavel, my co-founder, was getting nervous, I always kept saying that this is the best time of our business, because we are laser focused on every penny where we spend it and how we're going to eat tomorrow. So that was much better. So now, having a little bit more capital, you're less careful with it, and I think that I miss that.
And it was interesting, Ivan. Like, your journey of starting VIS was a bit interesting because you moved to the Ukraine to start it, and then you got stuck there, which was great for me because it allowed me to go and enjoy your house in New Brunswick. Oh, you weren't there. But maybe dig into that a little bit. I mean, you built an international team now, and half of them are not in the same time zone. What's it like to have a team that's on the other side of the world?
Well, with the COVID now, that's the new normal. And I never understood, how do you run the team in the same location? When you started Talking To, and when you were, all in on staying inside of Volta, bringing in the talent, I mean, after all, it is not Silicon Valley. It is Halifax, wonderful city, but the talent is scarce. And, to find people in one location. So it's been always a mystery to me how people are still thinking that they should be, should have an office, should go to office, waste all that time. So Ukraine was really going there because I could. The previous company that we built, I had 40 plus people in Ukraine. I never met half of them in person. So it was just sort of because I wanted my son to learn the language and go there. But having people in the different time zones, you just need to develop the processes, the policies, the software, the communication channels, everything out of the gate. But you do need to start with, the basics like the strategy, the vision, mission, core values. That is something that I don't think is, at least in my experience, is not recommended doing remotely. This is something that you want to do offsite, which is sort of reminds me how we kicked off a couple strategic meetings for you, Shawn, in Nova Scotia, that also was successful, having a team on site. But other than that, I think other than strategy and even the quarterly plannings right now, we're running with a full dependency mapping and everything remotely. So that's sort of, I don't see it being done any other way, actually.
I recall, Ivan, that at one point you were paying for an office for your employees in the Ukraine, and then COVID hit, and then even though everyone started to work remotely, you still were on the hook for the office. So maybe not the best idea for a bootstrap founder or someone who's trying to watch their cash to take up that expense.
Well, and that was again my mistake, because I insisted. There was two startups that actually started last year off the ground, and one of them, as again not being careful and running two things at the same time, I sunk basically January this year, because you have to focus on one thing at a time. But the leader that I hired to do that project, he insisted that everybody has to be in the office. So then when the COVID hit, we had, nobody could predict that. That's totally fine. But, even managing people in the office, I feel like I have better connection with people when they're remote than actually in the office. I actually think that you're more effective. Look at even you're late now 1 minute to any meeting, and Shawn starts, bitching about that already. Usually when you think about the big office, people are constantly late, at least like 10, 15 minutes, dragging their freaking lunch to the rooms. And then, I remember IDEX days, it's just constant maze running around the building trying to find the office. And now nobody's ever late.
Except for you.
Well, I find my ways to do it when we're doing it with you. But in general, the tolerance for being late to Zoom meeting is like 2 minutes. And after 2 minutes, you're like, where is this guy? So I really don't see any other way around it. I don't know what's going to happen with all the commercial properties and the offices and everything else, but I definitely think that this is the way to go.
Speaking of big meetings with large organizations, that has become your specialty with VIS. Would you mind digging a little bit into your consolidation model?
So at VIS, we took on sort of an ambitious goal to really write the methodology of how to build consolidation business, or the roll-ups as they call them, but not only in the veterinary domain, but in any other, whether it's dentistry, physiotherapy, or anything else, because the framework seems to be the same. And we spent last year and a half researching how other people are doing it, and then putting together a methodology that carries two purposes. One is to really systematize the consolidation and have it sort of out of the box, because most of these businesses right now, at least in the veterinary domain, are focused on 3 to 5 years return on investment. So they have to really build it fast, and then there needs to be a framework. And the second purpose behind it is really to do it without damaging the people that do the work. So we are now narrowing down on putting the methodology that we've developed into the software, and then having a software that will help with the process and the metrics of the business, and veterinarians execute on their work without burning out.
Very neat. Speaking of businesses helping other businesses, Shawn, what a lot of listeners might not know is that from the beginning on Talkatoo, that you've been working with Google for your voice AI. And in fact, Talkatoo was recently accepted into the Google Voice AI cohort. What's been your experience in working with Google, and how's that relationship going, and how is the cohort going?
Yeah, Matt, thanks for that. So yeah, it's actually the second company that I built using Google Tech, or building Google building blocks. And a lot of people might not know that, but Google Cloud is a scalable infrastructure that allows people to build software and technology on top of it, much the same as Amazon Web Services. And so Google is an incredible group. We've been working with their speech team to really build the next innovations around speech technology using the most powerful computer networks in the world. And so being part of this cohort with Google, their very first startup kind of scale up or incubator for voice technology, has been incredibly interesting. We've met with some of the I guess, the godfathers of voice in our industries. So we've met with the founder of Siri, the founder of the VoiceBot podcast, all of these industry executives that have really helped bring voice to the level that it is today. And so their industry knowledge has really helped Talkatoo form this solution that is easy, efficient, and can be used anywheres. And so we're really excited about it, Matt. I think there's some great things going to come out of it. We're about halfway through that process. And our company is growing faster than ever. We actually just crossed over the 1,000 user mark just the other day, which is a big milestone for us.
Wow. Well, what listeners might not know as well is that if you can't afford an iPhone, Google has this operating system, and some phones will have it called Android. So people like Shawn can also use the phones.
That's really helpful, Ivan. Yeah, that's really, really helpful. And it makes you look incredibly intelligent. So thanks for mentioning that.
Google also has a suite of digital tools, such as a podcast platform. And I want to dig in a little bit to, Ivan, what you're doing with your marketing over with VIS. You've been taking a very unique approach with the Consolidate That podcast and your video content and all of the different marketing things you've been doing. I know you're kind of a marketing nerd yourself. So can you dig into a little bit about how you are creating value for your customers who may not be ready just yet to work with the company directly?
The approach that I took here that is different from SmartFlow. In SmartFlow, we had an idea for software, and we build the software and we iterated on it, and then you build the prototype and you test it with the market, then you iterate and then you improve it, and then you continue building. And when I came out of IDEX, I thought, okay, what competencies did I now accumulate that I can apply further into my career? And as you mentioned, marketing is something that I'm very passionate about, but we also stood up a very sufficient and efficient support operations in Ukraine, as well as the R&D team. So I said, can I take those three things and apply it to the next business? So we realized that there is an opportunity in the consolidation domain, and there's also a pain point where the veterinarians are not enjoying experience while they're going through consolidation. And instead of building a prototype and giving it to the customer, we decided to take it from marketing, actually, and I can call it maybe marketing as a product. So basically, we created a thought leadership in how to build consolidation using marketing, PR, writing articles, and becoming thought leaders. It was very new to me to have a PR dedicated person from a year into the business, but it was extremely effective, and I really recommend anybody who wants to take that approach. Instead of writing code and prototyping, do a customer validation by consulting and bringing your ideas to life.
Yeah, I also want to build on that, Matt, and just explain to our listeners that, when we started this podcast, we had no idea it was going to turn into what it has turned into. We started the podcast as something to do back in those early days. And then really it's become this incredible platform for both me and Ivan. There's really nobody in the veterinary industry that we can't talk to or that we couldn't have participated in our show. And the reason for that, I think, is because we've been very deliberate in what we're doing here. It hasn't been to amplify our brands. It hasn't been to, sell more of our products. It's just turned into a really nice tool in the toolkit, which is both of our companies, that has helped us leverage and kind of grow our businesses. So podcasting is also something I'd recommend to every organization. There's something interesting in every entrepreneur's mind that could be talked about and turned into a podcast. And I think the more of it that happens, the more it will accelerate and push this industry forward.
I just wanted to make fun of you online.
Absolutely, Shawn. And I feel like that's really respectable that the podcast isn't meant to be a commercial platform. We've been very deliberate in building it out so that it's meant to focus more on the wonderful innovations and technological advancements in the veterinary space and not just be a sales pitch for various companies. We're just about out of time here, so I wanted to ask, given the opportunity to talk about your companies on the podcast, which you rarely get the chance to do, is there anything you'd like to say, either of you?
Yeah, I guess I'll start, Matt. So the one thing that I would like to say is anybody that's been listening to our podcast, please go to Talkatoo's website and try our software. It's free. You don't need to put a credit card in. This is my plea. This is my pitch. So please go give our software a try. And then the last question that I would really like to ask our guests is reach out to us on the social platforms. If you've got ideas for shows or episodes, or if you've got feedback, or tell us the episodes that you like, because oftentimes me and Ivan do this and we know that thousands, actually close to 5,000, 10,000 people download this podcast monthly, but we don't know what you like. So let us know. Reach out to us and tell us. We'd love to hear from you.
I just think that our best episodes when I get to make fun of you, man. This is like, if it's like the more downloads, I think there's a correlation. There's a linear dependency.
There could be. I don't know. Yeah, that's a good question as well.
So you're saying that the most popular episode of the podcast is yet to come, and it'll just be the two of you roasting each other for a half hour?
I'm into that. I'm into that.
Do a roast? That'd be interesting.
I'll actually prepare for that one.
Oh, dude, I'll make notes. I'll go to Nova Scotia. I'll do research. I'll go to your hometown. I'll get that picture with the kittens.
Oh my. Sounds like a photo shoot.
This has been a very fascinating episode. Thank you both again for finding the time. As you know, because you came up with the idea, at the end of every episode, we ask 2 questions. The first one is, do you want to recommend a book, a TED Talk, or other piece of media that you've recently devoured that you found inspiring or educational? Ivan, why don't we start with you?
So the book that I'm reading right now, again, I'm really focused on hacking flow these days, and that's getting into the state of flow at work to increase my performance. And the book that I would recommend is recently published in just February by Steven Kotler, The Art of Impossible.
And I'll jump in there. So my first one is a really old one written in the 1920s by a guy named Napoleon Hill. It's called Think and Grow Rich. The title really should be edited, but it's an incredible book for how to manifest desire and stay focused on whatever it is that you want to attain in your life. It's been a guiding light for me. And then a shout out to our friend Ernie Ward for recommending the book Chasing Fire. I found that book just awesome. Me and Ivan have talked about it, and that's actually one of my favorite. Stealing Fire. Thanks, Ivan. You're so good. A little compliment for you. I mean, that's one of my favorite parts of the podcast is getting these recommendations for things that inspire other people to check out myself. So we love those recommendations, Matt.
If only there were more talks of Simon Sinek to recommend, so it's not always just the same one.
Yeah,
exactly.
The second question is, typically, is there another innovator that you would want to invite on the podcast? But this time, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. Who is your dream podcast guest? Shawn?
I think I'm going to take the easy one. I'm just going to repeat what you just said. Simon Sinek would be amazing to take to this industry and have a conversation with him, especially with so many of our guests recommending him.
And I would say the author of Art of Impossible, Steven Kotler. He is the follower of many psychologists that research this state of flow, and then he seems to be the guy on the cutting edge at the flow research community. So I think that it would be amazing to have him on the podcast. Thank you so much for listening to the Veterinary Innovation Podcast. If you want to hear about our new episodes, please follow us on any social media channel. Also, you can check out our website at veterinarynnovationpodcast.com. See you next week.